Hello, I'm Jane. Welcome to my channel, which is called The Interior Path. And in it, we are exploring Christian spirituality, and in particular, the contemplative path. And in this video, I want to talk about how we go into the contemplative silence within. It isn't particularly difficult, but it's taught in lots of different ways, and I'm going to come at it a slightly different way because I think that we need first off to be able to understand that stream of thoughts that often gets in the way of us being able to experience the silence. There's lots said about the mind chatter, but I want to look at how we actually focus on it, how we actually experience it, because once we understand that, then we can have some choices about it. We all know that inner stream of consciousness where thoughts run on, sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground, sometimes very usefully, and we consciously engage in thinking, as I've been doing as I prepare to do this video. And other times it runs on and it's not that helpful. It can be negative. It's as if we don't really have always a lot of choice over it. Certainly we can consciously use our thoughts in certain ways, and when we're not doing that, they seem to run on anyway and just under the surface. And when we come to sit in silence, that gets to be a bit problematic. The first thing I want us to understand about these thoughts that run on is there are a couple of things that we can do with our thoughts. Firstly, we can completely engage, associate, become involved with them. So, for example, if I think about when I made some porridge for my breakfast this morning, I can think about that as if I'm completely reliving it. I can climb into the thought. I can think about how I mixed it, how I tasted it, what I added to it, as if I'm doing it all over again. We call that associating with our thoughts. Or another thing I can do is step back a bit and just disengage from it. I can watch it as a thought. I can watch that person that looks like me making porridge and tasting it, but I've disengaged from it. I'm not inside the thought. So this is a process of distancing from our thoughts. And when I distance myself from a thought, I've got a bit more control over it. I can also then choose to let it just drift on by or choose not to engage with it. And this is quite a powerful thing to be able to do, particularly in the early hours of the morning when we're having all sorts of worrying thoughts, because that's often when they crop up and they can stop us from sleeping. And usually at that time, when they've got such a powerful hold over us, we're really very engaged with them then. So this little trick of disassociating, just being able to spot the thought, but to let it pass by, to choose not to engage with it, is a very powerful thing that we are able to do once we understand that we can do that. Most people don't. So we then can apply this to when we come to intentionally be in our place of inner silence. The thoughts are always going to crop up. And the idea is not to resist them. We don't want to suppress them or push them down, because that makes us very active. And what we're looking for is a passive state as we go into the silence. So in order to just be quite passive about it, we first of all need to notice, are we engaged? Are we disengaged? And if we're engaged, just step outside and notice from that position how you can watch the thought float on by without resisting it, without judging it, without suppressing it. You can just disengage from it and let it float on by without it having any control over you. And so this is what we're after as we come into the silence. It's not to stop the thinking. It's to have a different relationship with the thought, a disengaged relationship, and then to let it pass by. Now, we might watch the thought pass by, and hot on its heels is another thought that crops up. And certainly in the early days when we're learning this technique of coming into the silence, there might be lots and lots. They might go into overdrive as you're first learning about this. It's fine. Just gently notice, make sure you're disengaged if you're not already, and then let it float by. No matter how many times you do that, it doesn't matter. As I say, especially in those early stages. And then one of the things that we can do to help us remember to disengage and to let the thought pass by is to utilize an anchor. Now, an anchor might be a word or a simple phrase. So I actually just use the words be still. That's my favourite. And whenever I have thoughts come up, I just notice and I use be still as a way of just disengaging and coming back into the stillness until the next thought comes up. And I do the same again. And what you notice after a while of this non-resistant, this passive allowance of disengaging and coming back to the quiet, you might begin to notice that there is a little space that happens between the thoughts. After a while, they don't come at you quite so fully as when you first start, and you catch a little bit of space and another little bit of space. And you can just sit there in that quiet. And after a while, those times of quiet can lengthen. Now, we're not seeking out that quiet. We're not seeking to concentrate on it or focus on it or do any of those things. It's more allowing. We're just allowing ourselves to be in it. And if another thought comes up, that's fine. We go back to the process, letting it pass by, be still, and waiting for the next space to come. So it's that sort of movement that we're after. And after a while and after much practice, and that might mean that you begin to realize it within the first few times of practice. It might take much longer than that, but after a while you notice that space is growing and becoming much more familiar to you. And so as you in time go into your meditation, you quite readily and quite easily find that space. Now, I'm not saying those thoughts are never going to come, because they do. I've been practicing this now for, it's about 35 years actually, pretty much a daily basis. And still I have thoughts coming up, but it's the management of them, and the space is much longer. And what I want us to understand is that there is an inner physiology in the brain that's associated with this. And once we understand this, it makes it much easier to grasp what we're after. In our normal waking state, which is where I'm at right now, so I'm using thoughts, I'm using ideas, I'm conversing with you, it's a normal waking state. There is a certain brainwave pattern, a synchronicity within the brain that's allowing that. Brainwave that's called the beta brainwave. We need that to carry on our normal working life. And our thoughts come out of that beta brainwave pattern. But as we get into those spaces, as we get into meditation and silent contemplation, those synchronous waves change. And we're going to notice as we begin this journey a shift in those spaces between thoughts when we will find snippets of clarity, snippets of alertness, and you can feel the shift happening after a while. And what's happened physiologically within your brain is that it has shifted into a theta synchronous pattern in the frontal lobe. And truly, I am completely oversimplifying this at the moment, but that's what's happened. You've moved from the beta, you're synchronizing at a different wave, and you can notice that change. You can completely feel a difference that's going on. And as I say, to start with, it might be just momentary, a few seconds, and then it grows to minutes, and then it grows. And then after time, you can, as you stay faithful to the process and the daily practice, you can begin to notice this shift on a regular pattern and just simply sit there. And what you also notice is if something happens that breaks into the pattern, then once you become quite kind of accomplished, if you like, the phone can go, the doorbell can go, and you can come back out and go back in to your theta pattern quite quickly. After dealing with something, it stays with you for quite a while after you have come out of the silent place. Now, it's not that we then go on to live in this state of theta. None of us could do it. When we, have finished our meditation session, we go back to our normal beta pattern, but it does have an effect on us. Over time, we become much calmer. It's much easier for us to find that still place. And you will begin in that place to find your inner senses growing. So your sense of intuition, your ability to listen for that still small voice with the inner ear, which isn't really heard as a voice at all, but it's a sense of knowing. Listen, we call it listening with the inner ear. That develops over time at the more time we spend in this this theta state. So that's what we're looking for. Now, it might be that for the first 3, 4, 5 times you don't feel any of it and you think, oh, this is not for me, this is no good. But it takes a while. It's like learning any skill. It takes practice. It takes a bit of faithfulness to the process, to commit to doing it daily so that, you can learn a skill. You can think of any skill. It might be something like playing the piano or, playing a musical instrument. You need the practice to become familiar and accomplished and to have an inner learning about it so that you can eventually just pick up the instrument and play. It's very much like that. Faithfulness to daily practice is really important with this. And we usually say 20 minutes twice a day is going to get you there. It might be that it comes to you quite quickly. It might be that you go for quite a long while before you begin to notice this inner shift. And then the idea becomes to simply sit in a very passive state in this inner quiet. Thoughts will come. They're much easier for them to pass by. For me now, how it feels as if when the voices, once I'm in that deep state of beta and I hear those voices of the thoughts, they're quite distant. They almost don't, I can just dismiss almost because they're so far away that they don't affect me. I don't want to engage with them. I'm already so far disengaged that they don't disrupt this beta place where I'm just, sitting passively enjoying the peace. Passive is important. We're not actively seeking this. The instructions that I am giving here are the instructions that lead you from a passive, non-resistant focus. So that's slightly different, isn't it, from actively concentrating or actively seeking out the quiet. It's a very, very different thing. That's what we're after. So I use be still. I've said that already. It might be, somebody was saying to me the other day that one of the things that they do is just focus on their breathing. That's great. Absolutely fine. If that's what does it for you rather than a word, because we're all constructed differently, maybe just that breathing is what you need to anchor you back. It's not that you're going to be focusing on your breathing throughout. It becomes an anchor to disengage you while you are synchronizing your brain waves into a deeper pattern. So that's the sort of the science behind what's happening, albeit, as I am saying, a very, very simplified version of it. And that's what we're after. I'm going to stop there, and what I'm going to do then is just perhaps make another video to follow this up, which will have a space where we can practically look at doing this. And in that video, I will then invite you to press the button and switch it off for as long as you want to. Once I've talked you into a place of quiet, switch it off for as long as you want to. And then when you're ready to come out of that, you can flick it back on and I'll close down that contemplative session. I hope that's been useful. I hope that has explained what is going on when we're sitting in the silence, and particularly these really important points of disengaging from thoughts, not resisting them, and of sitting passively rather than actively seeking out the quiet. So give it a go, and I will catch up with you in the next video when we will have a practice at this. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye for now.